And we'll give participants just a few moments to come into the room. Good afternoon, and welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. I'm Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. For more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together researchers with experience in the federal government to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our HEROES fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. During the webinar, we invite you to use the Q&A tool to ask questions. We'll address these questions at the end of the presentation or during the presentation when there's a natural stopping point. The webinar recordings and slides will be available in the QEM Resource Hub. By attending this webinar, you will be added to the QEM network and granted access to the Resource Hub. And I am so proud to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Chris Atchison is a former program director in the Division of Equity for Excellence in STEM within the Directorate for STEM Education at the U.S. National Science Foundation. Chris's research focuses on inclusive science education and designing and implementing accessible field learning and research experiences to support students with disabilities in geoscience academic programs. And Dr. Carrie Hall holds PhDs in biology and STEM education and has over 15 years of experience in writing, directing, and mentoring grant efforts at the national level. Her passion is helping early career faculty define and grow their research agenda and realize their talents as researchers, teachers, mentors, and lifelong learners, the full definition of a scholar. Her QEM territories are Oklahoma and Arkansas, and as a proud Tulsan, she is excited to be working in her home communities. And joining us shortly is Dr. Chaz T. Gipson. He's a national grants leader and scholar practitioner who has overseen large-scale discretionary grant programs serving hundreds of colleges and universities nationwide, advancing student access and success in STEM and high-needs disciplines. His leadership spans federal grant monitoring, peer review oversight, technical assistance, and data-informed performance improvement. Dr. Gipson holds a PhD in communication focused on media representation, mental health, resilience, and higher education, along with a master's in education leadership and policy studies from Howard. He also earned a Master of Divinity in Counseling from Virginia Union University, a BA in Sociology and Public Health Sciences from Morehouse College, and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at American University's School of Education. So without further ado, I am happy to turn the floor over to our presenters today. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Welcome to our discussion today on strengthening your proposal with supplementary documents. These are all the documents, the additional documents that you are required to submit with any proposal beyond the project narrative and the project narrative as a whole. We're even going to get into talking about the budget today too a little bit. So, Carrie, if you could switch to the next slide, please. The real goal here for supplementary documents are more than just adding extra work, because I know that when I was submitting proposals and you always save this stuff to the end. It's like, I'm so excited to get into the project narrative. I want to talk about what I want to do and the partnerships and everything else. But the supplementary documentation is incredibly important. And a lot of people don't put that time and energy that they should be putting into these. Now, as a former program director and reviewer, I've I'm here to tell you that the review process takes these documents and this documentation incredibly seriously. They demonstrate credibility and expertise of you and your project team. They show capacity to execute the project. They confirm partnership authenticity. So when you're describing the types of partners, you're able to uh, talk about, the purpose and the actual activity for each of the partners. They explain the finer details of the project. So a lot of the things that you wouldn't put into the narrative, but demonstrate how you are how you're conducting the project. This is where a lot of the supplementary documentation comes. And then as a result of these additional documents, they honestly strengthen reviewer confidence that you are able to conduct the project the way you say you're going to. And so these are just a few reasons why they are incredibly important. There's so many others, and I hope through the presentation today you'll see and you'll get a feel for why you should be considering these at the very beginning of the proposal development process just as much as the project narrative itself. So next slide, we will talk about the personnel documents specifically. I'm going to talk about these very briefly, and then I'm actually going to go in and demonstrate some of these live after we finish our presentation today. So for those of you who are not familiar with the ORCID or the ORCID, a lot of people call them, it is a 16-digit unit a personal identifier that if you don't have an ORCID, if you're not registered for one, it's free to register for. And I believe most publications or most journals now require you to have one or heavily encourage you to have one. Basically, what this does is when you have your identifier and you submit this identifier to anything you publish, anything you present, any proposal that you have, it keeps everything together. And the major real reason for the importance of this is that when you go in to create your bio sketch, which we'll talk about in a second, you can pull all the data from the ORCID into your bio sketch seamlessly. So if you don't have an ORCID, I highly recommend you registering for it. I'll show you that in just a minute. And then you can go in and update things manually as well. The BioSketch common form will have how to documentation, and I have a link for you on the next couple of slides to how you create your science CV and your current pending support. And again, a lot of this information can pull from the ORCID once it's set up. So we'll talk about the BioSketch. We're going to talk about your current pending support document. And then we're also going to talk about your collaborators and other affiliations. All of these documents, the BioSketch, CNP, and collaborators document are all personnel documents in your supplementary requirements. So next slide is our ORCID. You can just do a quick type in, go into orcid.org. The QR code can take you right to it. And it brings you up to a page like you see here. And if you do not have one, it's simple just to click the register now and you can sign up for it. If you don't have one and you want to align all of your existing presentations, your existing literature, existing grant proposals, those kinds of things to it, there is a way for you to manually enter each of these documents or each of these outcomes of your dissemination. It is time intensive, which is why if you're early in your career, sign up for this thing right away so that you can submit this every time that you submit a publication, submit a presentation or anything like that. So then it's almost like if you've been to, if you have a Google Scholar account set up where Google does the searching for you, it ends up becoming something very similar to that. But the ORCID communicates with the Science CV directly, so you can create your biosketch seamlessly out of this. So, like I said, when we get through the presentation itself, I'll go in and show you what this looks like internally. So next slide, we'll talk about the Science CV. This is the Science Experts Network Curriculum Vitae. And several agencies and institutions, and I'll show you a list of those here momentarily, require this now. And so the link, Christine just put the link in the chat. This QR code will take you right to NIH and the page where they have a wealth of information about Science CV, uh, including how-tos and background information. So do check that out. And then on this page, it brings you right up to it. You can click into straight into the National Science Foundation from here, which is one of the agencies that now requires you to have this. So again, if you've submitted proposals in the past and used the old BioSketch format, that is no longer, well, NSF, I will talk about this in a minute, but there's a deadline date for when you have to switch over to use Science CV rather than the old BioSketch format. It was in January of 26, but it's been postponed, and they've identified that this will be a requirement in May or soon after. So I'll show you that in just a second as well. Next slide, please, Carrie. So the current and pending financial support used to be just a document that your sponsor program officer or office at your institution would have you fill out, or they'd fill it out for you. But through Science CV, it actually brings up a form that you see here, and it is incredibly quick and seamless. Once you put this information in, it is always going to be found within your Science CV. So if you go in and create a whole new biosketch for a different proposal that you're submitting, you can go in and click on and off of different projects that relate to that. So you only have, it's a lot of manual work up front. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but once you put that in, it's always going to be there, and you don't have to put it in any longer. And you can create all kinds of different biosketches based on different topics from what you already have in there. So the current pending support document, the document itself is found in the Science CV, and I will demonstrate that at the end of our presentation today. So next slide, Carrie. This is a list of all the participating agencies and organizations that currently use or require or have adapted or participated in the development of Science CV. So you'll notice that the Science CV link that I shared with you was an NIH link, and they are who developed and host the system itself. It's actually hosted with the National Center of Biotechnology information through NIH. NSF requires it both for biosketches and CMP. IES uses Science CV for biosketches. Department of Energy requires it for submissions. Department of Defense, or I should say, I guess, Department of War now, right? Environmental Protection Agency, NASA, the Smithsonian, Department of Agriculture. So a lot of these require it. Some of the later ones were involved in the development group and might not particularly require it at this moment. But I think that once we get to the point, Carrie, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Once we get to the point of requiring it, like you see here, they had an original timeline of January 25th of 2026 to require it to be used for all submissions. That has been delayed, but as you see here in red, they are expecting it to be in place in May of 26. So coming up in the next couple of months, but they are going to post a notice when this is enforced. So right now, if you're submitting proposals with the old BioSketch format, it's not going to kick you out. It's not going to cause you to um, be returned without review. But if you don't have a BioSketch set up now, I would highly encourage you to get working on that as soon as possible. And just like any of our other webinars or workshops, if you want to reach out, if you need assistance with this, I'm happy to meet with anybody if you have questions about this. So I believe I'll turn it over to you, Carrie. That's me too.
That's you. Yep.
That's me. So the collaborators and other affiliations document. I have, and I think Christine, you get the link to that one as well. You'll put in the chat. There is a form for this, and the link is now in the chat. It brings up a template, Excel spreadsheet template. There's a lot of information up front, and I share with you here on this slide and the next one. There are 5 separate categories of information that correspond to the 5 tables in the COA template. The first category is just your overall your name, your last name, your middle initial, and your organizational affiliation in the past 12 months. The second table requires you to put in any names of personal, family, business relationships. Otherwise, it would preclude you from service as a reviewer. And listing in the type of relationship column specify the personal, family, or business relationship involved. So anything that would preclude you from being a reviewer on any particular topic within any agency. Table 3, this is the big one. This is where you should list all of your known advisors and advisees. So all of your PhD advisors and any individual that you served on a PhD committee for. So even as primary advisor or committee member, you would list this out. And this is through for the entire career, for your entire career. These advisees, so your PhD advisors will always be a conflict of interest. They'll always be, you won't be able to review anything for them. They shouldn't review anything of yours, and especially your own advisees. So listing all these out automatically puts these folks as conflicts for anything that you do. So you need to make sure that you list all these. Next slide talks about the next 2 tables. Table 4, this is where you're listing the names and organization affiliations for anybody that you've co-authored any book, article, report, abstract, or paper within the last 48 months. And then any collaborators on projects of funded awards, graduate research, or anything like that in the last 48 months. So this is 48 months only. This will be a section that you will have to go in and update. So it'll require you to put in a date, and then so you can routinely go in and clean out ones that are older than 48 months and make sure you're adding in new collaborators. This is a living document. And if you're really active in research and partnerships, then you'll want to make sure you keep that up to date. And then finally, table 5, any editorial board editors, co-editors with whom you've interacted. An editor-in-chief, if you are an editor-in-chief, then you must list the entire editorial board you work with. So this is only in the past 24 months, so 2 years worth of data here that, excuse me, that you would need to go in and update. So that's the collaborators and other affiliations document. Like I said, the link is in the chat. Excuse me. And that'll bring the template up right away. So, all right, now I think it's your turn, Carrie.
That's right. Yes. Thank you, Chris. So Chris just covered all of the category of what we call the personnel documents. So I'm going to talk a little bit more now about the other documents that we know of as the special information and supplemental documents. So this whole category of supplemental or ancillary documents that go along with your project description when you submit a proposal includes all these different categories. And so under special information includes documents that provide evidence of physical, personnel, financial, and intellectual support for the proposed work. So in general, and there's a little bit of agency difference in this, these special information documents include the facilities, equipment, and other resources document, the budget and the budget justification, the data management and sharing plan, the mentoring plan, and the references cited. So I'm going to address a little bit of each of these, especially from my perspective as a former program director, and kind of indicate why these are important along with your project description. And why is my slide not moving? There we go. Okay. So the facilities, equipment, and other resources document is used to assess the adequacy of resources that are available to perform the work that you're proposing. And for NSF and for NIH, this means both for intellectual merit purposes and for broader impacts. You should use this document to your best advantage. You need to describe clearly both the internal and the external resources that you have available to support the work, as well as physical infrastructure and personnel that will contribute to the project. It's a narrative description. There isn't a template for this. It's just a, I think it's a 2-page limit document, but it does not include any kind of financial information. So you don't say something like, we've got a $30 million genomics lab available. Nothing like that. It's just a description of what's available to you. Now, one of the most common mistakes I saw in proposals is that people tend to forget that digital infrastructure, computer laboratories, anything like that is considered part of the equipment and facilities that are available to support. So I have a little bit of an example here for you that describes that kind of infrastructure support. So a fully equipped metagenomics lab is available for sample processing by the project's researchers and graduate students. For bioinformatics data processing, we will contract with our partnering colleagues at the Institute for Genome Sciences. Processed data will be secured by IGS and transferred to the research team's secure servers, which have adequate storage space and processing capabilities. So just in that one little paragraph, what you see is it's describing physical infrastructure, computer infrastructure, personnel infrastructure, and who will be doing some of the processing of the data. So all of that falls under the category of facilities, equipment, and other resources. Servers absolutely count as equipment. Laboratory space with computers, that counts as equipment. So don't forget, when you write your facilities, equipment, and other resources document, that anything that possibly can touch your project, that should be included as part of its infrastructure. Okay, so that's the first document. Next, the budget and budget justification. Now, I'm not going to touch too much on this. Budgets are a whole nother topic for a webinar that we're hoping to do sometime in the near future. Budgets are a lot. So if you've ever dealt with putting together one of these budgets, you understand that it takes quite a bit of work to do. So all agencies have templates that you have to use to prepare your budget. And then the agencies differ as far as if it's a template or just a narrative document that is required for the budget justification. So it's 2 different documents that go together and should talk to each other back and forth, line for line. For the NSF budget, what I'm showing you here in the image is NSF Form 1030, which is the budget form. And there's a different sheet for each year of the project. And then it culminates in what's called the culmination of the project, a culmination sheet, which shows the totals across the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 year project, whatever it might be. So the budget, but like I said, the budget justification is comprehensive for the entire duration, and it's one document that kind of marries with this template document. It is narrative, so it has to have descriptions of each category of budget templates. This is things where if you have the assistance of an office of research or a budgeting office, they would put in things like an increase in PI salary or co-PI salary of 1% per year of the project. They would describe that inflation of the salary lines. They would also describe the negotiated rates for indirect costs, etc. So hopefully the Office of Research, if you have an Office of Sponsored Programs or Sponsored Research, these are the people who can help you to prepare this document. If there isn't an Office of Sponsored Programs or Research available to you, it's whoever your authorizing authority might be at your institution, whoever hits that final submit button when you're ready to release the proposal from your institution to the agency where you're proposing. That's the person who would most likely be able to help with this budget form. So like I said, we're hoping to do a future webinar on budgets specifically because line for line, they are complex. And especially with budgetary constraints on particular projects, you have to come down to the penny. And so you have to do a lot of juggling. And budgets really are one of those things that will come up to the very end before you hit submit at midnight. The budget will be one of the last things that has to be dealt with. So that's not to say to wait till the last minute because you do have to start early, but just keep that in mind. The budget is quite complex. Okay, the data management and sharing plan is for NSF at least, it's a 2-page limit, and it is narrative. There is not a template for this particular document, but it describes how the proposal conforms to policies. And those are not only federal policies, but also policies for internally within your organization. Does it conform to what your organization subscribes for data management and sharing? For example, if you're including human subjects research, you have to outline in this data management sharing plan how you're complying with your IRB approval for things like highly sensitive data, personnel data, that kind of thing. So and then the sharing of research results. You might also have local policies based on sharing of research results. And oftentimes the agencies will have solicitation-specific requirements for sharing of data, especially if it's related to the expectations of a particular field of study. So for example, NIH requires genomic data, both human and non-human, sharing via an approved data repository. And the link that I have here about approved data repositories are ones that partner with NIH to disseminate genomic data to appropriate databases. So things to consider and address in your data management sharing plan include things like the types of data, the samples, the physical collections, software, curriculum materials, other materials that can be produced in the course of the project. So anything like that that might be able to be shared and how it's going to be organized. Also, the standards to be used for data and metadata format and content, where there are specific standards that are expected. Policies for accessing and sharing, including provisions for appropriate protections of privacy. That's critical if you're doing human subjects research. Confidentiality, security, intellectual property considerations, especially if there's any kind of patent work that might be going on in your project, and other rights or requirements. Also, policies and provisions for reuse or redistribution and the production of derivatives. So if you're actually producing a product such as software, how that's going to be secured and then also shared. And then also plans for archiving data, archiving samples, library specimens, or museum specimens or library materials, and other research projects, things for preservation. All of those types of considerations have to be outlined in this data management plan. And then again, like I said, depending on your field, depending on local and federal policies, how you're going to share that required, the data or outcomes that are required to be shared. Okay, and finally, the mentoring plan. Now for NSF, mentoring plans a couple years ago, it used to only be that you had to have a mentoring plan for postdoctoral scholars. But a couple of years ago, NSF changed that policy to include a mentoring plan for all graduate students on the projects as well. So when you're devising a mentoring plan, one thing I will say is this has become critically important in the review process. For years, NSF especially was concerned with problems of inadequate or absent or even harmful mentoring practices on projects that were funded by NSF. And so this mentoring plan, it has become quite critical, and it is under scrutiny and should be taken very seriously as part of your proposal development. So some of the key components of the mentoring plan, and this is for most of the federal agencies, include the target audience. It covers all personnel who will be in contact with the scholars on the project, including those at the subrecipient institutions, not just the ones at the main campus. the activities that they'll undergo, such as career counseling, grant proposal training, publication guidance, development of teaching skills, development of mentoring skills, and how they will interact with undergraduates who work in the lab as well. Ethics training to include instruction in responsible and professional practices, in compliance, in appropriate ways to handle samples and potentially sensitive data. Diverse collaboration, so guidance on collaborating with researchers from diverse backgrounds, how cultures of the lab will be influenced and become good climates for students and for graduate students and postdocs to thrive. And then it should also include some sort of annual review. An individual development plan or an IDP is highly recommended to track professional progress. And there are some websites out there where you can collaboratively with your grad students or postdoc develop their annual review documentation. So all of these key components, it's critical that the students and the postdoctoral scholars be involved in the development of these, because you definitely want to make them individualized to each of the scholars working in the lab. Now, keep in mind too that the types of mentoring you might mention in your mentoring plan may vary by, of course, your field of study. So, for example, for NSF and NIH funded projects, you might propose mentoring plans that include academic research mentoring that focus on the career development of the student or the postdoc. If you're writing to the Small Business Administration or the Department of War, you might talk about pairing established companies and small businesses for technical and management assistance in federal contracting, something like that. And then also subcontracting plans. So oftentimes there's a plan that requires set-asides for small business, sometimes reaching as much as 30 to 78%. So this mentoring becomes very critical in some of these projects. So some of the best practices out there for developing these mentoring plans include three things, which number one, I already mentioned, individualizing the plan. You definitely want to make sure that you're being specific to the career goals of the student you're mentoring. The one-size-fits-all model does not work. We know that from a lot of research that has been funded by NSF, that one-size-fits-all is not adequate. And so if you have a one-size-fits-all mentoring plan in your proposal, it most likely will not review well. It needs to be personalized and individualized to your field and to your scholars. And it has to be actionable. So describe specific mentoring activities rather than generic support. So like I said, things like teaching skills, developing teaching skills, developing grant writing skills, developing lab management skills. And then also you should be able to measure those outcomes. You want to make sure that you're being an effective mentor. So use metrics to evaluate the effectiveness of the mentoring plan. And I want to strongly suggest consulting the literature in this field. There is a lot of literature out there on mentoring. The research on mentoring has really come around in the last, I'd say, decade, and we funded quite a few projects from NSF in the EDU directorate that we've come up with best practices for mentoring of students. And so please do consult and reference those studies when you develop your mentoring plan. Okay, and finally, your references cited sheet. There's no page limit on this because, of course, it could be quite extensive. All references must be included. Anything you reference anywhere in your proposal, especially the project description, must include references. So the required format for the references cited sheet varies by agency. NSF you have to name all of the authors on a paper, the article and the journal title, the volume, the book or a book title, the volume number, page, et cetera, and include a URL if applicable. For NIH, things differ a little bit. You only have to include the first 6 authors of a reference, the title, the journal, the volume, etc. And then as well as the PubMed Central Referencing Number, the PMCID, for any paper that falls under the NIH public access policy. So just keep that in mind. As you're developing a proposal, definitely refer to the publication preparation guide for the agency to which you're applying, so that you know the format of the references cited sheet for your proposal. Now there is an NCBI tool called My Bibliography, which features the My NCBI to manage the citations. and that will automatically add that PMC ID number. So it's a good tool. And if you're used to using it, that's great. I have encouraged PIs to use it even when I was at NSF. I was encouraging PIs to use the NCBI tool because it does keep things the standard format that you would want to see. You would want to see standardized formatting for all of your references cited. So those are the other supplementary documents that I wanted to cover. And now for other ancillary documents that might be part of your proposal, I want to hand the presentation over to Dr. Gipson.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. So yes, as Dr. Hall already mentioned, there are some other ancillary documents that we will discuss that will look at letters of collaboration, letters of support, uh, research involving the use of human subjects, and etc. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so first, let's start by clarifying that there is a true distinction with between letters of support and letters of collaboration. That's often misunderstood, and that this difference is very important that we note. So while they certainly may appear similar, they serve different purposes, or very distinct purposes, should I say, in helping reviewers assess a proposal. Letters of support are about demonstrating institutional commitment. They demonstrate that an organization is backing the project and is willing to provide access, resources, or infrastructure. And these letters help reviewers understand whether the project is supported within the context where it will be implemented. Then letters of collaboration, on the other hand, are about contribution. They define the specific role that an individual or an organization will play in carrying out the work. These letters help reviewers understand who is contributing to the project and what expertise they bring. One of the most common issues is when these letters become interchangeable or overly general. When that happens, reviewers may question whether the partnership is really fully developed. Strong proposals make a clear distinction, and they show both the institutional commitment and active contribution. And when reviewers see both, it really signals that the project is not only well designed, but it's also well positioned for successful execution. Next slide, please. So right here is and I love to talk about this because it tells you really what uh, reviewers are really looking for. So when reviewers are engaging in supplementary documents in the application, of course, or the proposal, they're not reading it passively. They're actively using them to validate what they've already read in your proposal. Okay, so many of these documents, they function in ways as a cross check. They help reviewers determine whether what is proposed on paper is actually feasible in practice. So the first thing we'll look at is credibility. Is it does this team really have the expertise to lead this work? Reviewers are looking at bio sketches. They're looking at prior work. They're looking at roles to determine whether the investigators have the actual background, have the actual experience, and have the scholarly and practical track record to deliver what is being proposed. And if a proposal is ambitious, uh, but the expertise is unclear or misaligned, reviewers begin to question whether the team can actually carry it out. We also looking at, or reviewers are looking at, capacity. Does the proposal demonstrate the infrastructure, partnerships, institutional support needed to execute successfully? This is where facilities, institutional backing, and partners' contributions matter. Reviewers are asking, do they have access to the population? Do they have the systems in place to manage the work? Or is there really evidence that is actually can be implemented at scale. And the other thing, when we're thinking about capacity, and I know I was having a conversation with other scholars and fellows recently, and when you're thinking about capacity, if Dr. Johnson is teaching 6 classes and on 3 research projects, and he's on this proposal, then you got to really think, does he really have the capacity to execute this work? So capacity is really about moving from idea to execution at scale. The next thing we think about clarity of roles in this space is where reviewers really want to understand who is responsible for what. So if you have multiple investigators or partners that are involved, there should be no ambiguity about the roles or responsibility. So reviewers need to know who is leading the research design, who is managing implementation, who is responsible for data collection, who is responsible for analysis and things. So when roles are unclear or overlapping, reviewers begin to question coordination and project management. The next thing, when you're thinking about what reviewers are really looking for, are really authentic partnerships. Are these partnerships or collaborations real? Are they active? Are they thoughtfully developed? Are they loosely defined? Or are they loosely defined? Reviewers are very good at detecting when partnerships are performative versus operational. Strong supplementary documents show evidence of real engagement, ongoing relationships, clearly defined contributions, and alignment between partners and project goals. And if partnership feels vague or symbolic, it raises concerns about whether they're really or they will uphold during implementation. And finally, when I say finally, there's plenty more, but finally, of what I'm going to share about what reviewers are looking for. Do these documents, are they in alignment? Do they reinforce and strengthen the narrative, or do they feel disconnected? Everything in your supplementary material should tell the same story as the proposal. If the proposal describes strong partnerships, the letter should reflect that. If the project emphasizes certain expertise, the bio sketches should demonstrate it. When documents are misaligned, it creates friction for the reviewers, and they begin to question which version of the story is accurate. So we want to make sure that everything is well aligned and everything is clear so that the project is feasible. Reviewers are not just asking, is this a good idea? But reviewers are asking, can this team actually deliver? And the supplementary documents really help answer that question. Next slide, please. All right, now we're going to talk about common mistakes. So over the years, I've seen many proposals where the supplementary documents unintentionally weaken what is otherwise considered a strong submission. And what makes this challenging is that the core idea is often solid. The research is compelling. The proposal is written very well. But the supplementary material introduced small signals that cause reviewers to pause. One of the most common issues is generic language or vague language. When documents are broad, when documents are non-specific or overly polished without substance, they don't actually help the reviewer understand how the work will be carried out. For example, statements like, "We are excited to support this important project." It sounds positive, but do they provide evidence of what support actually looks like in practice? Reviewers are looking for you to be very specific and very detailed what actually will be done, by whom, and in what capacity. Another issue is the lack of clarity around roles and contributions. So in complex projects, especially those with multiple investigators or partners, reviewers need to quickly understand who is responsible for each aspect of the work. If that is unclear, If the role seems overlapping, or if the responsibilities are not aligned, reviewers begin to question coordination, they begin to question leadership and overall feasibility. They may start asking themselves or one another, how will this project actually be managed? Who is accountable for each component? The next thing is misalignment, which is another concern. When supplementary documents do not reinforce what is stated in the proposal, as I already mentioned earlier, it creates inconsistency. So, for example, if the proposal emphasizes a strong partnership, but the supporting documents are vague or minimal, that disconnect raises questions. If the proposal highlights specific expertise and your bio sketches, and I feel like I'm just re-emphasizing what was already stated, but if your bio sketches do not clearly demonstrate that expertise, it again raises questions. Consistency across all materials from the start of the proposal to the completion of the proposal is critical because it builds a coherent and credible narrative. And also, another thing we see is where proposals overpromise but do not provide evidence of capacity to deliver on that promise. Ambition is certainly important, but reviewers are also evaluating realism. If a proposal outlines a large scale, complex project, but the supplementary documents do not show the infrastructure, do not show the partnerships, do not show the experience needed to support that level of work, it creates a gap between the vision and the execution. And reviewers tend to be very cautious when they see that gap. So again, avoid missing, we certainly want to avoid missing unclear or missing institutional commitment when it comes to this. And finally, timing matters. Documents are prepared too late in the process are often rushed, are often vague or and less strategic. So they may not be well aligned with the proposal, and they may lack being specific in certain areas, and they often miss the opportunity to strengthen the overall narrative. Okay, so starting early, what you're hearing us say constantly throughout the presentation, allows these documents to be developed intentionally and in coordination with the proposal itself. All of these issues introduce uncertainty. And in a competitive review process, when the organization or the agency is only selecting a small number of applicants or proposals, this is very crucial. Uncertainty is one of the biggest risks to have that your proposal can have, because when reviewers are uncertain, they hesitate. And when they hesitate, it impacts your scores. And when it impacts your scores, then there's a strong chance that you may not be selected, okay? And your scores will reflect that, okay? Next slide, please. What strong letters should include? So, strong supplementary documents are clear, they're specific, they're fully aligned with the proposal narrative. They clearly define roles and responsibilities so reviewers can understand who is contributing to each and every aspect of the project. They identify very specific, whether specific contributions, whether that includes your expertise, access to participants, access to certain facilities, and other resources. They provide evidence that the team has the capacity and readiness to execute the work proposed. They also demonstrate alignment, not just to the project goals, but across all components of the proposal. And most importantly, they reflect intentional partnerships. Reviewers should be able to see that these collaborations are thoughtfully developed and meaningful. Again, so you want to, when you're talking about partnership, you want to show that longevity, um, it, that you have that relationship and you've done past work with those partners, so that reviewers can have more confidence saying, okay, this will work. This is strong. This proposal is strong. So, and when these elements, all these elements that you see on the screen are present, your documents do more than just support the proposal. They strengthen it by reinforcing your credibility and again, your feasibility. Next slide, please. And finally, I will close this with a few practical considerations that can make a significant difference in the strength of your supplementary documents. First, start early. We've said it 5 times already. Start early. These documents take more time than most people expect, especially when they involve coordination with partners or institutional offices. So, starting early allows for stronger and more thoughtful development. So, we cannot emphasize that enough. Please start early. Secondly, connect with your pre-award office or a research mentor. They often have experience with funder expectations, institutional requirements, and common pitfalls. Engaging them early can strengthen both your documents and your overall proposal. Third, know your full research story before you start drafting. Supplementary documents should not be developed in isolation. They should also align with and reinforce the proposal narrative. That's much easier to do when you have clarity on your full project from the beginning. Next, use templates when they are provided. Many agencies have very specific expectations for documents like bio sketches and facility descriptions. Using the correct format ensures compliance and help reviewers quickly find the information they need. And finally, check and double check for errors in formatting. Small issues, inconsistencies, missing information, formatting errors, they all can distract reviewers and signal a lack of attention to detail. And at the end of the day, strong supplementary documents reflect preparation, alignment, and intentionality. And when all of those elements are present, they once again strengthen the documents, and not just the documents, but the entire proposal. So remember, strong proposals tell a compelling story. Strong supplementary documents prove that the story can actually be carried out. Okay. Next slide, please. And that concludes our presentation. And so please see the QR codes on the screen that will take you so you can see what events that we have coming up. Also, you'll see QR code for all of our heroes, all of our colleagues, so you can see what our specific expertise is. And then we would love for you to feel free to reach out to us. If we can support you, we have office hours. And then there's a webinar feedback form that we would love for you to fill out. So we would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you for an informative presentation, Dr. Atchison, Dr. Hall, Dr. Gipson. We have time for a few questions. You can use the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand to go off mute and ask your question live.
And I'm going to jump in here and ask a question of all of you first. Since we ran out of time, I was hopeful to be able to demonstrate Science CV and ORCID and those kinds of things. If you would like a supplementary presentation on demonstrating these things, throw in the chat that you would like to see something like that, and we'll put something together. But otherwise, I'd be happy to take any questions you have. So it might be, Christine, that we put together maybe a working webinar, not even a webinar, but just a working meeting to where people can join and we can go through those things.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dr. April Erickson has her hand raised, so we will allow her to come off mute and ask a question.
Yeah, hi. Great job. This is a short question, maybe just yes or no. Are engineers expected to use the sign EN I guess
Science
CV.
Science CV. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I threw that in the chat for you, April. If you're submitting a proposal to any of the agencies that require it as a biosketch, then yeah, you would have to.
Hmm. Okay, thank you.
It's not science only. I guess it's everybody that's submitting to those agencies. So happy to work with you if you've never been through it. And we also realize that we went through a lot of information here too. So if there are follow-up questions, please do feel free to reach out to us.
Well, in the absence of further questions, we will conclude this webinar today, and we are so happy you attended. We hope to see you at another QEM Heroes webinar coming up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well.